Here is the complete story. Translated into natural, smooth American English, optimized for YouTube voiceover, and safe for AI text-to-speech platforms. My name is Annie Roberts. I'm 28 years old, and I work as an interior designer. The man who was supposed to become my father-in-law slammed a heavy Hermes leather briefcase onto the table between us. His voice was bone-dry and cold. "George, $200,000, he said. Sign this non-disclosure agreement and disappear forever. A girl like you has no place in the Lockwood family bloodline. You're nothing but lower-middle-class noise. You'll only embarrass my son and ruin everything we've worked so hard to build." I didn't touch the money. I just stood up, turned around, and walked straight out the door. George. 3 hours later, I was standing in the lobby of a Chase bank, depositing my regular $2,900 paycheck. It was just a completely ordinary Tuesday. What I didn't know was that Charles Lockwood had already hired a private investigator. That investigator took photos of me walking out of the bank, framing the scene to make it look like I had accepted the bribe. George. The very next morning, those photos, along with a handwritten note, were sitting neatly on Nathan's desk. The note simply read, "She took the money." Nathan called me immediately. He was actually laughing on the phone. "Annie," he said, "since my father thinks he bought something, why don't we give him the show he paid for?" George. That single, simple sentence became the spark that set their entire world on fire. If you're already feeling angry and hooked, remember this moment. Because what happens next is going to completely blow your mind. I met Nathan Lockwood back in July 2024 at the Chicago Architecture Biennial. George. I was presenting a sustainable housing project, converting a 1920s warehouse into eco-friendly apartments designed for working families. He stopped right in front of my booth. That day, most of the developers stopping by were just looking for cheap labor or trying to steal trendy buzzwords to package their own projects. But Nathan asked genuine questions. George. He wanted to know how the lives of those families actually changed after moving in. He asked how the heating costs compared to traditional buildings during Chicago's brutal winters, and whether the eco-friendly materials would truly stand the test of time. We grabbed a coffee together. That coffee turned into dinner at Lou Malnati's for deep dish pizza. George. And that dinner eventually turned into an 18-month relationship. A bond I truly believed was unbreakable. Nathan worked for his family's company, Lockwood Properties. It was a 3-generation real estate development firm, the kind of commercial giant that quietly shapes the Chicago skyline. George. Most people only notice companies like that when a new skyscraper goes up, or when a neighborhood suddenly becomes unaffordable. Nathan was the vice president of development. He joined the company right after business school, working his way up the hard way, following the classic script where your last name is on the building, but you still have to prove your worth to everyone every single day. George. What I loved about him was that he actually cared about what happened after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Most developers finish a project and immediately move on to the next plot of land. But Nathan would revisit the sites. He checked if the ground floor retail spaces were actually attracting local small businesses. He checked the occupancy rates upstairs. George. He cared about whether the building truly integrated into the fabric of the community, or if it just stood there like an arrogant monument. We were completely different in so many ways, but our differences balanced each other out. He came from 3 generations of old money. My dad was a contractor, and my mom was an accountant. George. They taught me 2 fundamental things from an early age. First, a building needs a solid foundation, or it will collapse. And second, you have to track every single dollar, or you lose control of your life. Nathan attended elite private schools and a top-tier business school. George. I put myself through a state university by working part-time jobs, paid off my student loans just 2 years ago, and still drove a 2018 Honda Civic. Yet, we both shared the exact same core belief. Buildings are where life actually happens. If you're going to design or develop them, you had better care about the people living inside them. Porch. In June 2025, on the opening night of the Chicago Architecture Biennial, right in front of an art installation I designed myself, Nathan proposed to me. He gave me his late mother's ring, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds set in a white gold band. His mother, Diane, had passed away from cancer 8 years earlier. Porch. Nathan rarely talked about her, except to tell me she was the only person in his family who ever asked him what he wanted, rather than commanding him on what he should want. Before he could even finish his sentence, I said yes. At our engagement dinner, my father held Nathan's hand tightly and said, "You're getting the absolute best person I know." Porch. Nathan looked my father straight in the eye and replied, "I know, sir. I know exactly how lucky I am." My father, Jack Roberts, a retired contractor whose hands were still rough from 40 years of building houses for other people, smiled with genuine relief at those words. My mother, Beth, cried tears of joy. My older brother, Owen, joked that someone was finally taking me off his hands. Porch. And my younger sister, Claire, who was still in college, excitedly asked if she could be the maid of honor. It was one of those beautiful nights that makes you feel like, this is what a real family feels like. Charles Lockwood didn't attend. The official story was that he was away on a business trip. 2 weeks later, he sent a card. Porch. Inside was just a cold, printed phrase, "Congratulations." Nothing else. No personal signature, no mention of meeting me, not even a polite line saying, "Welcome to the family." Just a generic mass-produced card with his name printed at the bottom. Nathan explained that his father was just like that, rigid, distant, and emotionally detached. Porch. I said it was fine, that I'd meet him eventually, and that we had plenty of time. I should have known right then. Men who choose to be absent during moments of joy don't just stop at being absent. When they finally show up, it's usually to take total control. I had been working at Sterling and Hunt Design Studio for 5 years. Porch. I started as a junior designer, making $48,000 a year. Porch. Back then, I worked on other people's projects, learning how to read clients who said they wanted modern, but really meant it needs to look expensive, or clients who said cozy, when they actually meant, I have a tiny budget. I learned to listen to what people weren't saying, observing how they really lived rather than how they wanted to appear. Porch. By 2025, I was a senior designer earning $78,000 a year, managing my own client roster. I had completed 15 major projects and won 3 industry awards. I was proud of my portfolio because every single space in it served a real purpose. Take the Morrison family kitchen in Oak Park. The center island became the true heart of their daily life, not just a design highlight. Porch. Or the living room for that couple in Evanston, where I realized they needed the sofa facing the window instead of the TV, because what they truly wanted was to watch their neighbors and feel connected to the vibrant life outside. My boss, Helen Sterling, once told me, "Annie, you have a rare gift. You see people, not just spaces. That's why they trust you." Porch. I built my career on that very trust, client by client, project by project. I wasn't making the astronomical money the Lockwood family made, but I was doing work I believed in and earning an honest living. Porch. What I didn't know was that Charles Lockwood had already hired someone to run a thorough background check on me. My salary, my parents' tax returns, my student loan repayment history, my credit score. He gathered every single detail just to calculate precisely what he thought I was worth. Lockwood Properties occupied the entire 35th floor of the Willis Tower. Porch. Photos of 3 generations of Lockwoods hung in the main lobby. The grandfather who started out building post-war housing in 1952, the father who expanded into commercial real estate in the 70s, and Charles, who took over in 1995 and transformed the business into a $650 million empire. In every single photo, the men were smiling. Except Charles. Porch. In every picture, Charles had the cold, evaluating look of an auditor counting inventory. Nathan's office was just 3 doors down from his father's. Smaller, facing north, without the sweeping corner view overlooking all of Chicago. He once told me, "My grandfather built what people needed. My father built to showcase power." I want to combine the two. Hearing his perspective made me love him even more. Yet through all our dinners and all our discussions about the future, there was one person who never smiled, Charles. And I was about to discover that to him, total control mattered far more than his son's happiness, the birth of future grandchildren, or any concept of family that didn't align with his commercial interests. On a Monday afternoon in December, my phone rang. I was sitting at my desk at Sterling and Hunt, rushing to finish a client presentation. Color swatches and fabric samples covered my drafting table. The caller ID showed Charles Lockwood. It was the very first time he had ever called me directly. I answered, "Hello, Mr. Lockwood." "Annie." His voice was rigid and transactional, like he was talking to a third-party vendor. "I'd like to discuss a few things with you privately. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? Just the two of us." Just the two of us. The words landed with an uncomfortable echo. "Tomorrow?" I repeated. "Yes." "The Capitol Grill downtown, 12:30 p.m. I've reserved a table under my name." He paused. "It's best if we handle this discreetly." Discreetly. The word hung in the air like a threat wrapped in polite language. I could have said no. I could have asked what it was about. I could have told Nathan right away. Instead, I said, "I'll be there on time." Deep down, a part of me wanted to hear firsthand just how blunt he would be when spelling out his subtext. That evening, as we made dinner in our Lincoln Park apartment, I casually brought it up to Nathan. We were making carbonara, his favorite. The simple Tuesday night routine gave me a comforting sense that we were building a real grounded life together. "Your father called me today," I said, stirring the boiling pasta water. "He asked me out for lunch tomorrow." Nathan looked up from the cutting board, where he was mincing garlic. "My dad called you directly? He said he wanted to discuss a few things privately." Nathan's expression shifted, first to surprise, then to a flicker of something like hope. "That's actually a good thing. Maybe he's finally coming around. You know, wanting to get to know you better, talk about wedding plans, things like that." I nodded, keeping the alarm bells screaming inside my head to myself. "Text me when you're done," Nathan said. "I want to hear how it goes." I promised I would. Lying in bed that night, I knew with absolute clarity that a storm was brewing. I just didn't realize he would make it look so much like a cold, raw transaction. The next morning, I carefully picked out my outfit. A navy blue dress my mother had bought me 3 years ago for job interviews, paired with simple silver earrings. Professional, but not overly subservient. Nathan kissed me before leaving, still full of hope. "Good luck. I really think this is his way of trying to accept us." I took the CTA Red Line downtown. Walking through the freezing December wind along North St. Clair Street, I arrived at the Capitol Grill at precisely 12:28 p.m. The hostess greeted me with a smile. "Reservation name, Lockwood." Her smile remained, but a subtle shift crossed her eyes. The look of recognizing a high-profile client, the automatic deferent service staff display when real wealth walks through the door. "Right this way." She led me past the main dining room to a private room in the back. Wood-paneled walls, a single table, and a door that could be completely closed. Far from the windows, far from any potential witnesses, Charles was already seated. He didn't stand up when I walked in. "Thank you for coming, Annie." His voice lacked a single drop of warmth. It was entirely transactional, as if he were thanking a contractor for attending a termination meeting on time. I sat down. "Of course. Though I am curious why you asked to meet today." He smiled, but the emotion never reached his eyes. Let's just call it a clarification of expectations. There were no menus on the table. Next to his chair sat an Hermès cognac leather briefcase, a luxury item that cost more than most people's rent for several months. A glass of scotch sat poured in front of him. Nothing had been ordered for me. We don't need to order food, he said. Porch. This won't take long. Then he opened the briefcase. Inside was the largest amount of physical cash I had ever seen in my life. $200,000 in $100 bills, bundled in $10,000 stacks. 20 neat, precise stacks lined up like a museum exhibit titled, "Things You Were Never Supposed to Aspire to." $200,000, Charles said. Porch. It wasn't an offer, it was stated as an absolute fact. If you prefer, this money can be tax-free or wired directly to any account you specify. He slid a document across the table, 9 pages long, bearing the letterhead of the Lockwood family's law firm, with flag markers at the signature lines. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Porch. You will not contact Nathan. You will not speak about this family, and you will not attempt to form any future connection to the Lockwood name. You must relocate, preferably outside the state of Illinois. He placed a Mont Blanc pen on top of the document. The last page was already stamped with a notary seal. Porch. I've already secured job opportunities for you in Seattle, Portland, and Austin at respectable design firms. You'll do very well. I looked at the pile of money, then looked up at him. Why? It's nothing personal, Annie. He took a sip of his whiskey. It's commercial reality. Porch. I am currently negotiating a $180 million development project with Belmont Investment Group. A deal that will define the next generation of Lockwood properties. Preston Belmont comes from old Philadelphia money. He places immense value on certain guarantees. Guarantees like family alliances. He spoke as though this should naturally mean something profound to me. Porch. Preston has a daughter named Victoria. She's 29, with a Wharton MBA and an impeccable lineage. She and Nathan are an ideal match, both personally and professionally. Your presence complicates that alliance. He pointed toward the money. I'm sure you're a talented designer, but you come from the working class. Your profession is creative, but ultimately insignificant. Porch. Your family? He paused, appearing to choose his words carefully. Your family brings nothing to the table for Lockwood properties. Those words landed like a sharp slap to the face. Not, you're not a good fit, or you're not the right person, but you bring nothing. This money is more than you earn in 3 years, Charles continued, his tone terrifyingly calm. Porch. For 6 months of your time, it's exceptionally fair compensation. You sign the NDA, tell Nathan you realize the relationship wasn't appropriate, and relocate out of Chicago within 60 days. He slid another sheet of paper over. It contained talking points, a literal script detailing what I was supposed to say to Nathan. I realized we want different things. Porch. The pressure from your family's expectations is too much. I need to focus on my career. Word for word, I was being treated like a hired actor, assigned a script to break his son's heart. The Belmont deal closes on March 15th, Charles said. This matter must be settled cleanly and quietly before then, without any dramatic complications. He had been planning this for weeks, maybe even months. Porch. While Nathan and I were planning our wedding, picking out flowers, and discussing the guest list, Charles Lockwood was calculating how to erase me from the picture. I stood up. No. Charles blinked. Annie, be reasonable. This money is more than. No. I turned toward the door. Porch. You're making a massive mistake, he said, the professional veneer finally cracking as a sharp edge surfaced in his voice. I stopped and looked back at him. Your mistake was assuming I had a price tag. I walked out. The heavy oak door shut firmly behind me. The biting December wind hit my face, proving that I was still real, still standing, and still myself. Porch. I didn't touch the money. Not a single dollar, not a single document. I didn't reject him out of pride. I rejected him out of core principle. There is a profound difference between the two. What I didn't know then was what would happen next. I didn't know what Charles Lockwood was capable of when someone actually said no to him. Porch. Outside, the winter wind blowing off Lake Michigan cut right through my coat. I walked aimlessly, past Millennium Park, past the bean reflecting the gray winter sky. Finally, I sat down on a bench near the ice rink. watching families skate in circles. A mother was helping her young child balance. Teenagers were racing past. A couple was holding hands. An ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Porch. An ordinary life. My phone buzzed. It was Nathan. How did it go? I stared at the screen. How do you explain in a text message? Your dad just pulled out $200,000 in cash to buy me off and make me disappear forever. How do you phrase that without sounding completely out of your mind? I typed back. Strange lunch. Let's talk tonight when you get home. Porch. 3 dots immediately appeared. Strange? Is everything okay? What did he want to talk about? Can we talk about the details at home?
Okay.
I'll be home at 6. Love you. Love you too. I sat on that bench for over an hour, watching strangers go about their normal lives while my entire life had just been assigned a monetary value and declared worthless. Porch. The cold seeped deep into my coat, but I didn't move. I was processing, organizing, and memorizing every single word he said, every tiny detail. Deep down, a part of me already sensed that I would need to remember it all. By 3:30 p.m., I looked at my phone and remembered I had my paycheck in my purse. My December earnings from Sterling and Hunt, $2,900 before tax. Porch. The bank closed at 5 p.m. and I needed to deposit it. The Chase Bank was only 6 blocks away. I walked slowly, hands shoved in my pockets, trying to force myself back into the groove of a normal life. For a Tuesday afternoon, the bank was fairly busy. I stood in line behind a man depositing commercial checks and a woman arguing over service fees with a teller. Porch. When it was my turn, the teller smiled at me. Her name tag read Jennifer K. Hi there, how can I help you today? I slid the check across the counter. I'd like to deposit this into my account, and I'd also like to withdraw $120 in cash, please. Of course. She processed the check and handed me a withdrawal slip to fill out. Any fun plans for the holidays? Porch. I managed to force a small smile. Actually, I'm planning a wedding. Oh, congratulations! When's the big day? Next June. My voice sounded completely normal. Not at all like someone who had rejected $200,000 3 hours earlier, or a woman whose future father-in-law had just tried to buy out her entire life. The transaction finished at 3:47 p.m. The receipt printed out. Porch. I folded it up and slipped it into my coat pocket alongside my keys, lip balm, and all the other everyday items, proving this was still just an ordinary day. Porch. I stepped out of the Chase Bank at 3:52 p.m., holding my receipt, thinking about what to cook for dinner, wondering how to break the news to Nathan, thinking about anything other than the fact that my entire future had just been reduced to a figure inside a briefcase. I didn't look back. Porch. I failed to notice a man sitting inside the Starbucks across the street, a long telephoto lens pointed straight at the bank entrance, capturing every single moment. I didn't know that Charles Lockwood had hired that man 2 weeks prior. Not because I said no, but because he had been tracking my life long before that, desperately searching for dirt on me, and finding absolutely nothing. Porch. And when I walked out of that restaurant without signing his papers, Charles sent a simple text. Manufacture something. Private investigator Kenneth Garrett executed that order to perfection. I took the Red Line home, got off at the Fullerton station, and walked 3 blocks back to our apartment building. A 3-story walk-up with exposed brick walls. Porch. It was in this kitchen that Nathan and I learned to cook together, where we had our first real argument over whether to adopt a cat, and where we announced our engagement to our families. At 4:40 p.m., I unlocked the door, tossed my purse onto the counter, and stared at the client files on my laptop. The Morrison kitchen renovation blueprints and paint swatches awaiting my approval. Porch. I tried to focus, but I couldn't. So I started making dinner, a chicken stir-fry. I chopped the vegetables with unnecessary force, relying on the repetitive rhythm of the blade, hitting the cutting board to process everything that had happened. Nathan came home at 6:08 p.m., earlier than usual for a Tuesday. Porch. He found me standing in front of the stove, holding a wooden spoon, staring blankly into space. Hey, he kissed my temple. How was lunch? I turned off the burner and turned around to look at him. Your father offered me $200,000 to sign an NDA and disappear from your life forever. Nathan froze, key still in hand. He what? A briefcase literally filled with cash. Torch. He even brought a script dictating what I was supposed to say when breaking up with you, along with a list of recommended cities to move to. My voice was eerily steady, as if I were merely stating objective facts. He said I was nothing but lower middle-class noise that would only embarrass you and ruin everything the Lockwood family built. Nathan set his keys down with extreme care. Torch. He sat down at the kitchen table. Annie, tell me everything. So I told him. The private dining room, the Hermes briefcase, the stacked $200,000 in cash, the NDA, the breakup lines, the references to Victoria Belmont and the commercial alliance, and the cold calculation of assuming a price tag could erase me from the equation. I said no, I finished. Torch. I didn't touch a single dollar, I just walked out. Nathan remained silent for a long time. Why didn't he just come talk to me directly? Because he knew you'd say no. You aren't a problem to be solved, Annie. You're the person I chose. His voice was tight, a deep anger simmering beneath the surface. Torch. I can't believe he went behind my back, trying to buy you off like you were some kind of... He couldn't even finish the sentence. We just sat there at the kitchen table as dinner went cold, the heavy reality settling over us. Charles Lockwood had tried to use money to eliminate me from his son's life, and I had refused. Neither of us knew what would happen next. Torch. We talked for hours that night, about control, about money, about what family actually means when one person decides they hold the ultimate authority over it. We discussed whether we should confront Charles immediately or wait and see, and what all of this meant for us, our future, and our wedding in June. I want to marry you, Nathan said finally. Torch. No matter what my father thinks, no matter what he does, that doesn't change. I know, I said. Me too. What we didn't realize was that while we were sitting there talking, working out our next steps, Kenneth Garrett was sitting in his office in Schaumburg. He was uploading the photos of me at the Chase Bank. Torch. He was drafting a report that transformed an utterly mundane Tuesday errand into stark evidence of betrayal. He was inventing the very story Charles paid him to create. In less than 14 hours, everything would be completely turned upside down. When I fell asleep that night, I thought the worst was behind us. Torch. I thought I had successfully stood up to Charles Lockwood and walked away with my dignity intact. I believed the two of us could face this problem together. I had absolutely no idea that the real attack hadn't even begun. Wednesday morning, December 17th. Nathan left for work at 7:30 a.m. Torch. It was our standard morning routine. A kiss goodbye, reassuring each other that we would handle his father together. I left for work much slower than usual, still digesting yesterday's events. I could almost feel the phantom weight of that cash-filled briefcase, still seeing that cold, calculating look in Charles's eyes as he tried to sweep me out of existence. Torch. What I didn't know was that at 8:42 a.m., an overnight FedEx package arrived at Lockwood Properties, addressed to Nathan Lockwood, Vice President of Development. Building security delivered it directly to the 35th floor. When Nathan arrived, his assistant mentioned it. There's an overnight package marked personal on your desk. Nathan opened it inside his office with the door closed. Torch. Inside were 4 8x10 glossy photos, a 2-page investigation report bearing the header of Garrett Investigations, and a handwritten note. The note was written on Charles's personal stationery, embossed initials written in fountain pen, a script Nathan had recognized since childhood. She took the money. Torch. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Nathan, but you need to know who she really is. When you're ready, we can discuss our next steps. Dad? The photos captured me at Chase Bank, walking inside looking exhausted and sad, standing at the counter, and walking out holding a receipt. The final close-up captured my expression perfectly. Total relief. Like a heavy weight had finally lifted. Torch. That was genuinely how I felt at that moment. Relieved to finish a routine errand, deposit my paycheck and head home, relieved that the worst day of my life was finally over. But the photos provided none of that context. They simply showed a woman who had been offered a massive sum of cash a few hours earlier, appearing at a bank and leaving with a look of immense relief. The investigative report filled in the narrative details Charles wanted. Subject left the meeting location at 12:52 p.m. Proceeded to the Chase Bank branch on Michigan Avenue. Entered at 3:45 p.m., remained inside for 7 minutes. Exited at 3:52 p.m., holding a bank envelope and receipt. Behavior pattern is highly consistent with a cash withdrawal following a major financial transaction. The final line was circled in red pen. Subject observed holding a withdrawal slip for an amount matching the funds discussed during the meeting. I had never filled out a withdrawal slip for that amount. I held a deposit receipt. But Kenneth Garrett was paid to see whatever Charles wanted him to see, and he delivered. Nathan stared at those photos for 6 long seconds. And then he started to laugh. At 8:50 a.m., my phone rang. I was sitting at my desk at Sterling & Hunt, my coffee still steaming, my laptop just booting up. Annie? Nathan's voice sounded strange, light, almost amused, completely at odds with what he said next. Did you take my dad's money? I froze. What? No, I told you everything about lunch yesterday. I know you didn't. He was still laughing. A laugh that sounded like humor on the surface, but was laced with pure absurdity and disbelief underneath. But my father thinks you did. He just sent me the proof. Wait, except his proof consists of photos of you depositing your paycheck at Chase Bank yesterday. An errand you literally texted me about at 4:15 p.m. So the photos are real, but the story he built around them is a total lie. The coffee cup in my hand hovered in midair. I carefully set it down. He's framing me. Yes. And Annie, if he's willing to go this far, what else is he capable of? Has he done even worse things in the past? The question hung heavy between us, loaded with dark implications we couldn't fully process yet. Don't change a thing, Nathan said. Act completely normal, like we have no idea he sent this. I need time to think. But Annie, he just made the single biggest mistake of his life. What do you mean? He thinks he's destroying you, but really, he's showing us exactly who he is, and we are going to document every single move he makes. That evening, Nathan arrived home at 6:15 p.m., earlier than usual for a Wednesday. He carried his leather briefcase, the one I had given him for his birthday. He set it on the kitchen table and pulled out a manila envelope. I want you to see what he sent me. Seeing the photos in person was even more jarring. High-quality professional prints capturing every detail on my face. The exhaustion, the relief, a normal moment weaponized against me. The report was 2 full pages of carefully constructed lies, wrapping real facts, the times I entered and left, the 7 minutes spent inside. Around a purely fabricated narrative. Behavior pattern highly consistent with a cash withdrawal following a major financial transaction. And then there was Charles's handwritten note. She took the money. I pulled my bank receipt from my purse and placed it right next to the report claiming I took $200,000. Timestamp, 3:47 p.m. Deposit, $2,900. Cash withdrawal, $120. The contrast was striking. Truth and lies, lying side by side on our kitchen table. He can't accept that you're the person who said no to him, Nathan said, tapping the photo gently. Because if you turned down $200,000, what does that make him? A buyer who tried to put a price tag on his son's fiancée and got slapped in the face for it. I stared at my receipt. The ironclad proof of what I actually did. So he faked the evidence to turn me into the greedy person he accused me of being. Exactly. Nathan opened his laptop and pulled up the Illinois state statute on recording consent. Which means he's desperate now. And desperate people make mistakes. He turned the screen toward me. Illinois is a 2-party consent state. You can't record someone without their knowledge. But there's an exception. If you inform them you are recording for business record purposes and they agree, it's completely legal. I can record him, Nathan said. I just need to tell him I'm doing it. If I frame it as learning from Dad and keeping record of our business discussions, he'll almost certainly allow it. You're going to record your father? I want to know what else he's hiding. George. Because if he's capable of framing you for accepting a bribe you rejected, what else has he done? What else is he doing right now? Nathan looked at me. Let's give him exactly what he wants. We'll pretend you're ashamed, pretend I'm hurt but trying to forgive you. Let him think his plan worked perfectly. And while he's celebrating his big victory, we'll see what he accidentally let slip. George. I understood. We were going to stage a breakup drama. We were going to let Charles watch us fall apart. And while he enjoyed the show, we would be quietly recording everything else. We need untraceable burner phones, I said. End-to-end encrypted messaging. We're going to live two completely separate lives. One that's just a performance for him, and one that's real. Nathan smiled. George. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the cold, sharp smirk of a man who had just realized his father was someone to outsmart, never someone to trust. I'll pick up a burner tomorrow and install Signal, he said. All our real communication stays on the encrypted channel. Our normal texts and phone calls become pure script. George. He pulled out a notebook, the black moleskine he usually used for project planning, and wrote timeline on the very first page. We document everything, he continued. Dates, conversations, physical evidence. We build a case. A case for who? I don't know yet. But if my father is willing to fabricate evidence just to frame you, he's capable of far worse. George. Before we figure out how to hit back, I want to know what that far worse actually is. We were no longer just defending ourselves. We became investigators of our own lives, completely blind to the level of corruption we were about to uncover. Thursday, December 18th. During his lunch break, Nathan went to Target and spent $45 on a prepaid Samsung flip phone. George. The device couldn't be traced back to either of us. That evening, we set up Signal with a 24-hour auto-delete timer. We created a code system. Just a normal day meant no updates. Interesting morning meant new evidence discovered. Can we talk later? Was our code for an emergency that required meeting up in person. Our primary smartphones became our theater stage. George. On Friday, my routine text to Nathan read, still feeling so overwhelmed by everything happening right now. I just need some space. His reply was, I understand. Take all the time you need. Meanwhile, over on our encrypted Signal channel, your dad tried calling me twice today. I didn't answer. Good job. Make him think you're hiding out of guilt. George. I'm setting up my first recording this weekend. We were living a double life within our own relationship. We put on a show across every monitorable channel. Because if Charles was willing to hire a private investigator, what else was he tapping? The rest of our lives we reserved for the truth. Sunday, December 21st. Nathan went over to his father's house for dinner. George. It was a long-standing family routine, but these so-called family meals always felt more like a boardroom meeting than a dinner. Before leaving our apartment, he opened the voice memos app on his iPhone. Dad, I'm going to record our conversation, Nathan said during dinner, setting his phone face up on the table. I want to document these discussions for my own professional development. George. To learn from you. Charles paused, his fork hovering midair. That's unusual. You always say to document everything in business, Nathan replied smoothly. Consider this my masterclass. These are conversations about strategy, deal-making, and how you approach complex problems. I want to study your playbook. Charles weighed the request, then nodded. Fair enough. George. Just exercise discretion with where you share these. Of course. It's strictly for my own reference. Permission granted. Legal consent established. The recording was live. That first dinner recording ran for 18 minutes and 32 seconds. Charles asked Nathan how he planned to handle the Annie problem. Nathan said he was still processing everything and needed time to clear his head. George. That's wise, Charles said. These things are always messy, but you'll see this is for the best. Victoria Belmont is exactly what Lockwood Properties needs moving forward. Preston and I have already discussed the timeline. Once your engagement is finalized, the Belmont venture becomes a family asset rather than just a joint project. It consolidates everything. Nathan captured every single word. The casual tone Charles used when bringing up Victoria, and his absolute assumption that Nathan would fall in line with this pre-approved match. And then there was that phrase, what Lockwood Properties needs. Not what Nathan needed. Not what would make his son happy. Only what served the company. We had his voice, his strategy, and the arrogant overconfidence of a man who believed he had already won. Over the next week, I stepped up my own performance. December 28th was Lockwood Properties' annual holiday gala. In previous years, the party was usually held in late January, but this year it had been abruptly moved up. The reason was painfully obvious. Victoria Belmont was attending. The new arrangement needed to be made public. I went because Nathan insisted that my absence would look too suspicious. I wore a plain black dress without a single piece of jewelry. I arrived at 6:45 p.m. and walked out alone at 8:20 p.m. When Charles approached me carrying a glass of scotch, wearing that smug smile, I barely looked him in the eye. "Annie, so glad you could make it," he said. "Nathan insisted I come," I replied, my voice completely flat and hollow. "I hope you've gained some clarity on things." I met his gaze just long enough for him to see what he wanted to see. Shame, guilt, defeat. "I'm still trying to figure things out," I said. He actually smiled, raising his glass slightly, as if proposing a silent toast to my surrender. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the party and texted Nathan from my car. That was so much harder to play than I thought. His reply flashed on Signal. "You were absolute perfection. He thinks he's won. Every cold look you gave me in public is a lie he completely buys into, and every lie he believes gives us more room to dig." We were building two parallel realities. One was the story Charles saw. Annie Roberts slowly falling apart from guilt. The other was the reality we were living, systematically gathering proof of Charles's manipulations. Charles Lockwood wasn't just a control freak. He was operating out of absolute desperation, and we were about to figure out why. The end of December brought more than just holiday lights and year-end deadlines at work. It brought a bone-deep exhaustion, along with a wave of nausea every single morning the moment I smelled food. At first, I blamed it on the stress. Charles's trap, the constant acting, aligning with Nathan in secret, while pretending we were breaking up in public. Stress does strange, ugly things to your body. Normally a night owl, I was suddenly passing out before 9 p.m. I woke up every morning, feeling sick on an empty stomach. My period tracking app showed I was 5 days late, then 7, then 10. Last period, November 24th through the 28th. Expected cycle, December 22nd. Current date, December 30th. During my lunch break, I walked to a CVS pharmacy 3 blocks away from Sterling and Hunt. I stood in the family planning aisle for 10 full minutes, staring at the back of the boxes, as if they could reveal something beyond what I already suspected. I picked up 2 pregnancy tests and paid in cash. It felt ridiculous. Nobody was tracking my CVS purchases. But in a world where your future father-in-law hires people to spy on your Tuesday errands, paranoia becomes a very rational defense mechanism. Those 2 test boxes sat in my desk drawer all afternoon alongside client calls, email replies, and my boss, Helen, asking if I was feeling okay because I looked so pale. "Just a bit worn out," I said. "End of the year crunch." I brought them home in my purse, saying nothing to Nathan just yet. If I was actually pregnant, I wanted to be 100% certain before throwing such a massive variable into an already toxic situation. Saturday morning, January 3rd. Nathan left for the gym at 7:30 a.m. for his usual weekend routine. That predictable schedule made him easy to love, but it also made it easy to plan around him. At 8:15 a.m., I sat on our bathroom floor. The white subway tiles felt freezing against my legs, and 2 test sticks sat side by side on the edge of the sink. The instructions read, "Wait 3 minutes." So I waited, staring at the tiny displays as if sheer willpower could alter the outcome. Both tests displayed the exact same word, pregnant. I pulled up the app on my phone to run the dates. Last period, November 24th. Estimated conception window, November 20th through the 22nd. Today, January 3rd. I was 6 weeks pregnant. Estimated due date, August 20th, 2026. When Charles slammed that briefcase full of cash onto the table, I was already pregnant. When he declared that lower middle-class noise had no place in the Lockwood bloodline, I was already pregnant. When I walked out without touching a single dollar of his money, I was pregnant. When Kenneth Garrett snapped those photos of me at Chase Bank, I was pregnant. When Nathan and I formed our alliance, when we started recording, when we put on a fake breakup for Charles, I was carrying his grandchild the entire time. I was holding his grandchild inside me while he tried to buy me off and erase me forever. The timeline hit me like a physical wave, every realization colder than the last. I was still sitting on the bathroom floor when Nathan's key turned in the lock at 9:20 a.m. He was back early from the gym. He called out my name. I couldn't answer. My voice was completely gone, trapped somewhere between a positive test result and a mathematical date that made everything terrifyingly real. He found me sitting there, saw my face, and saw the 2 test sticks resting on the sink counter. "Annie?" I looked up at him. "I'm pregnant." Nathan dropped to one knee beside me on that cold tile floor. Still in his gym clothes, his face cycled through shock, processing, and a sudden tenderness that made my chest ache. "How far along?" 6 weeks. Due in August. I watched him absorb the reality. "Nathan, when your father tried to pay me to leave, I was already pregnant." He froze completely. "You didn't know then?" But neither did he. He just assumed he could erase me, buy me off, and frame me for taking a bribe, all while I was carrying your baby, his grandchild. Nathan pulled me tight against his chest, his hand instinctively resting over my stomach, even though there was nothing to feel yet. Just a tiny cluster of dividing cells. But those cells were about to change everything. What kind of man is he? Nathan's voice broke slightly. He couldn't even finish the question because we both knew the answer. He was a man who placed control above his own blood. A man who negotiated his son's marriage like a corporate buyout. A man who framed an innocent woman simply because she refused to be bought. We sat together on that bathroom floor as the morning sun filtered through the small window, feeling the cold reality sink into our bones. "This changes everything," Nathan said finally. "Look at the timeline. We can't let this drag on. We have to shut this down before you start showing." He was already running the math. "You're at 6 weeks. You'll start showing around 16 to 18 weeks. That's February, early March at the latest. We have to move fast." "Yes." He stared at the test stick, showing that indisputable word. "We aren't just protecting ourselves anymore. We're protecting our child." I'm going to make my father realize exactly what he almost destroyed. The stakes had completely shifted. This was no longer just about a relationship or whether love could survive family interference. This was about legacy. It was about the kind of family our child would be born into, the kind of grandfather they would, or wouldn't, have, and which parts of this legacy needed to be preserved versus which rot needed to be burned to the ground. "He can never be a part of their life," I said. "Our child will never be near him, not after this." Nathan nodded. "Then let's show everyone who he really is, not just us." Everyone. We spent that entire Saturday going through everything we had collected so far. 7 audio recordings gathered over the last 2 weeks. On those tapes, Charles spoke with increasing arrogance about the Belmont deal, about Victoria, and about moving forward after Annie. Every single clip captured a man convinced he had cleared his path. But we needed more. We needed to know what Charles was actually hiding. Why was he so desperate to dictate Nathan's marriage? What made the Belmont deal a matter of life and death? So critical that he was willing to risk everything, including his relationship with his own son, to force it through. Monday, January 5th. Nathan returned to the office with a completely new mission. As the Vice President of Development, he had full legal access to Lockwood Properties' internal files. Project budgets, vendor contracts, financial statements. Reviewing them was a standard part of his job. He began digging deeper, and what he uncovered was far worse than anything we had imagined. The Michigan Avenue project was supposed to be the crown jewel of Lockwood Properties. 22 luxury residential units, a $48 million budget, situated in a prime location meant to solidify the firm's elite standing. Nathan had worked on the outer edges of the project, site selection, initial permitting. But Charles had always kept a tight grip on the financial management. Now Nathan understood why. Deep inside the project budget files, Nathan found payments made to a vendor called Meridian Consulting LLC. $340,000 labeled as strategic development fees. Nathan didn't recognize the company name. He should have. He had worked in Chicago real estate development for 8 years and knew every reputable consultant and contractor in the city. He pulled the corporate record for Meridian Consulting. It was a shell company. No employees, no physical office, no real operational history. Just a bank account in the Cayman Islands and wire transfers authorized directly by Charles Lockwood. Then he uncovered another one. Apex Advisory Group, $215,000. Same pattern. Shell company, offshore account, Charles's sole authorization. Tracking back through 3 years of financial records, Nathan uncovered 8 separate transfers. A total of $8.3 million had been siphoned out of various Lockwood Properties projects into non-existent entities, transferred to offshore accounts where the money simply vanished, and not all the accounts were under Charles's name alone. 2 of them listed Adrienne Lockwood as a joint account holder. Adrienne was Charles's second wife, whom he had married 4 years prior. Everyone had assumed she was just his companion, but now it looked like a financial conspiracy. Nathan made high-resolution scans of every single document, invoice, and wire confirmation. He had ironclad proof that his father wasn't just a control freak. He was actively embezzling funds from his own firm. Corporate fraud, tax evasion, grand larceny disguised as consulting fees. Late at night on January 8th, a message popped up on Signal. I found the offshore accounts. My dad has been siphoning money to the Caymans for 3 years. Shell companies, fake consulting fees. 2 of the transfers are in Adrienne's name. How much? $8.3 million so far. I lay in our dark bedroom staring at the glowing screen, Nathan asleep beside me, trying to grasp the full weight of it. Charles wasn't just trying to control Nathan's marriage out of pride or tradition. He needed the $180 million infusion from the Belmont deal, because Lockwood Properties was bleeding out through the massive financial hole he had created himself. The Belmont deal wasn't an expansion project. It was a lifeline. That realization made Charles 10,000 times more dangerous than we originally thought. The next explosive discovery came directly from the Belmont transaction files. Nathan had full authorization to review those documents, since the development project would ultimately fall under his management once funded. Partnership agreements, profit-sharing terms, construction timelines, and return on investment metrics were all there. But buried inside the supplemental addendums was something else. Something Charles likely assumed Nathan would skim past, assuming it was just standard boilerplate text. The Family Alliance Agreement. 8 pages long. Signed on October 15, 2025. Exactly 2 months before Charles slammed that briefcase full of cash down in front of me. The agreement outlined a mutually beneficial family union between the Lockwood and Belmont families to reinforce partnership commitment and long-term strategic vision. Translated: Nathan would marry Victoria Belmont. The marriage had to take place before December 2026. In exchange for this family union, the profit split ratio favored Lockwood Properties, 65-35 instead of the industry standard 60-40. On a $180 million deal, that extra 5% represented an additional $9 million in profit over the life of the project. 2 months before Charles tried to buy me off, he had already used his son's marriage as a bargaining chip at the negotiation table. His bribe wasn't a sudden reaction to my presence. I had simply stepped into the path of a deal that was already set in motion. Annie Roberts was never a complication. I was just standing in front of a bulldozer that was already rolling. Right behind that document, Nathan uncovered the prenuptial agreement, dated November 15, 2025. Not for Nathan and me. It was prepared for the hypothetical marriage Charles had arranged between Nathan and Victoria. 26 full pages bearing the letterhead of the Lockwood family law firm. The terms effectively trapped anyone entering the marriage. A total forfeiture of all claims to combined company assets in the event of a divorce within 10 years, alongside severe financial penalties triggered by any public scandal. It wasn't a marriage contract. It was a legally binding surrender, disguised as a union. He had this drafted before he ever offered you money, Nathan said, his voice laced with quiet fury as he showed me the paperwork. We were sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the evidence spreading across the screen like a diagnosis. Before he framed you, Annie, he planned this out for months. You were never the issue. You just happened to be standing in the way of a plan he had already set in motion. I stared at the dates. October for the alliance agreement, November for the prenup, December for the bribe. His timeline for erasing me was executed with the exact same precision he used to develop real estate. Clear the obstruction, prep the site, build what you actually wanted. Except I refused to be cleared. The final piece of the puzzle came from email archives Nathan accessed through the corporate server, an exchange between Charles and Adrian from September 2025, long before any of this came to light, back when I didn't even know I was considered a problem. Subject: timeline restructuring. Charles, once the Belmont funding closes, we can restructure the Michigan Avenue debt and cover the shortfall on the River North project. The timeline is critical. Formal engagement by March, wedding by December. The deal must close in Q1 2026. Adrian, what about the Roberts girl? Charles, I will handle her. She is not material to the outcome. Not material to the outcome. That was all I was to him. Not a human being. Not the woman his son loved. Not even a significant obstacle worth worrying about. Just a minor detail to be handled. No different than applying for a zoning variance or clearing a construction permit delay. By the end of January, the complete picture was clear. Charles Lockwood wasn't just a controlling father, he was cornered. For 3 years, he had been embezzling money from Lockwood Properties, hiding the theft behind a network of offshore shell companies. The firm was severely overleveraged, its cash flow depleted, surviving solely on accounting tricks and shifting funds between projects. The $180 million Belmont deal wasn't about growth, legacies, or business expansion. It was about pure survival. It was a massive bailout meant to restructure his debt, cover his tracks, and make the books look clean before anyone noticed the missing millions. And the arranged marriage to Victoria wasn't about family status or matching social backgrounds. She was the collateral required to keep Preston Belmont at the table. To secure that money, Charles was willing to sacrifice his son's happiness and erase his own future grandchild. We now held 9 separate audio recordings of Charles outlining his plans. We held financial records detailing $8.3 million in stolen funds. We held the signed family alliance agreement, proving his premeditated arrangement. We held the prenuptial agreement, drafted long before he ever tried to break us up. We held the email exchange, proving Adrian was an active accomplice. 37 distinct pieces of evidence in total. Orch. Audio files, photos, financial documents, and timeline spreadsheets. All systematically organized inside an encrypted folder on Nathan's laptop, backed up to secure cloud servers, and printed out into 3 bound presentation binders. Midnight, January 22nd. Nathan turned to me in our kitchen. "We have more than enough to go to the board right now," he said. "We could end this tonight. But, Orch, I want to see how far he's willing to go. I want a complete record of just how ruthless he becomes when he thinks he's completely won." I understood him completely. This was no longer just about stopping Charles. Orch. It was about exposing him so thoroughly that no one could ever question who he really was. Not the board, not Preston Belmont, and not anyone who might try to make excuses for him as an overprotective father or a shrewd businessman. We wanted everyone to see the exact devastation Charles Lockwood was willing to cause just to maintain his control. So we let the performance play out. February brought the final phase of our plan. I publicly widened the distance between Nathan and myself. I took off my engagement ring, making sure my coworkers noticed its absence. I began publicly turning down his invitations to lunch, sending "I need space" messages in work chats where others could see them. My boss, Helen Sterling, pulled me aside in late January. "Annie, sweetheart, are you doing okay? You seem so distant lately." I forced my voice to tremble slightly. "I'm just dealing with some personal things. Nathan and we're trying to figure some stuff out." Her face softened with maternal concern. "If you need to take some time off." "No, working helps," I said. "It keeps my mind occupied." I let my eyes wallow with tears just enough to make it look completely genuine. Helen squeezed my hand tight. By the end of the day, she had mentioned it to at least 3 people. Word spread fast. Annie Roberts was heartbroken. The engagement was falling apart, and it was only a matter of time before Charles Lockwood heard the news. On February 3rd, I sent official cancellation emails to our wedding vendors. Salvatore's Event Hall, Flower and Fire Catering, Jamie Chen Photography, and Urban Stems Floral Design. Each email was politely vague. "Due to changing circumstances, we need to postpone the wedding indefinitely." Some vendors refunded our deposits, others charged cancellation fees. Nathan openly wrote checks from his office desk to cover those fees, ensuring his colleagues saw him doing it. He played the part of a desperate man trying to placate a fiancée who was slipping away. On February 8th, I changed my Facebook relationship status from engaged to Nathan Lockwood to single. I set the post to public so Charles's friends and business associates would see it. Within 3 hours, 47 comments flooded in. "Oh no, what happened? You deserve so much better. Are you okay?" My mother called right away. We had already prepped her for the show, but her voice was still cautious. "Honey, everyone is asking if you're holding up okay." "I'm managing, Mom," I said. "I just need some time." "Do you want to come home for the weekend?" "Maybe." "I'll let you know." I kept my tone professional and distant enough to sound authentic, yet warm enough to maintain our bond. My mother understood. She knew that sometimes you have to play the long game to win the actual war. Meanwhile, between February 10th and February 20th, Victoria Belmont appeared at Nathan's side 5 separate times. Charles orchestrated every single accidental encounter with the skilled precision of a developer clearing a building site. A private office tour where Victoria happened to drop by to visit her father. A lunch meeting where she sat waiting for Preston, who was running late. "Do you mind if I sit here while I wait?" A charity gala where she was strategically seated right near Nathan's table. Victoria was elegant, polished, and exactly the kind of woman Charles wanted in the family. A Wharton MBA with old money refinement who knew how to navigate high-stakes power without appearing aggressive. She was polite to Nathan, perfectly composed, and showed clear interest without coming across as pushy. What she didn't know was that Nathan recorded every single interaction. He documented the setup behind every staged moment, She was just another pawn on her father's and Charles's chessboard, no different than Nathan. February 14th, Valentine's Day. Whether Charles had zero sense of timing or was being deliberately cruel, Victoria showed up at the exact same restaurant where Nathan was having a business lunch. "Nathan, what a coincidence," she said with a warm, genuine smile. "I was supposed to meet my father, but his meeting ran over. Mind if I wait here?" "Not at all." They exchanged polite small talk about architecture, upcoming developments, and the harsh Chicago winter. Then she carefully brought up the elephant in the room. "I heard your engagement was called off. I'm so sorry." "That must be incredibly tough." "Thanks," Nathan said. "It's complicated. If you ever need to talk to someone who understands the pressure of family businesses, I'm always around." The offer hung in the air, seemingly thoughtful and innocent. Nathan's recorder captured every single word. "When he played the tape for me that evening, I heard the subtext Victoria didn't even realize she was projecting. I've been prepped for this role. I'm ready to accept this arrangement. Our fathers have already discussed this, and I'm willing to play my part." She held no malice. She was simply an unwitting accomplice in a game she didn't fully comprehend, which, in a way, made it even sadder. By late February, Charles was completely satisfied. Annie was retreating, and Nathan was appropriately receptive to Victoria's presence. His plan was working. He stopped making checking-in calls and stopped pressing Nathan about his future plans. He thought he had won. He believed the Annie problem had resolved itself exactly as he designed. That was the moment we retained an attorney. Grace Feldman specialized in high-stakes family law and corporate ethics. She brought 20 years of experience handling complex cases where personal relationships collided with corporate liabilities. Her office was located on the 14th floor of a loop high-rise, overlooking the Chicago River. We met with her on February 22nd. By then, I was 13 weeks pregnant, my stomach just beginning to show, if you knew what to look for. Nathan and I sat across the conference table, watching her review the evidence binder we brought. 9 audio recordings, 12 financial documents, the private investigator's report, offshore bank account records, the family alliance agreement, the prenuptial agreement, email chains, text logs, and a master timeline spreadsheet cross-referencing every single detail. Grace laid the files across the table like a prosecutor building an indictment. In many ways, that's exactly what she was doing. "This is extraordinary," she said, after 40 minutes of silent review. "Corporate fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud using a private investigator." She picked up the family alliance agreement. "This documents a clear intent to manipulate personal relationships for commercial gain. Mr. Lockwood, your father left behind a remarkably thorough paper trail of his own corruption." "What's our best move?" Nathan asked. "That depends on your ultimate objective," Grace replied. "Are you looking for criminal prosecution, civil liability, removing him from the firm, or complete public exposure?" Nathan looked over at me. I placed my hand over my stomach. Under my sweater, the bump was still subtle, but we both knew what was growing there. "All of it," I said. "We want everyone to know exactly what he did. Not just us, everyone." Grace gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Then you need a public forum with high-value witnesses present. Board members, key financial partners, people he can't easily dismiss or spin with PR tactics. The Belmont signing ceremony," Nathan said. "The final partnership meeting. Preston will be there with his board members. My father will be there expecting to close the deal. If we present this evidence then—" "That is your maximum impact moment," Grace agreed. "The largest group of stakeholders, and absolute accountability." She laid out our presentation strategy. Who would speak first, the exact sequence for introducing evidence, and how to frame the issue not as a dramatic family feud, but as undeniable corporate fraud with intentional personal manipulation as an aggravating factor. We left her office holding a bulletproof execution plan. 3 printed evidence binders organized by category. digital files prepped for projection, and a statement drafted for Nathan. Calm, precise, and completely irrefutable. The big meeting was set for March 6th at 10 a.m., over at Belmont Investment Group's office on the Gold Coast. Preston Belmont and 4 board members were scheduled to attend. Charles was planning to walk into that room like a victorious king. Victoria probably wouldn't be there. Her father preferred to handle the business first and do the celebrating later. We had 8 days to prepare. 8 days to rehearse our presentation. 8 days to make sure that when we stepped into that boardroom, every single thing in our hands was bulletproof. We needed evidence so airtight that no one could argue with it, explain it away, or twist it into anything other than what it really was. A story about a man who valued total control over his own family. A man who tried to force a massive commercial deal through payoffs, setups, and calculated manipulation. A man who had been secretly siphoning company funds for years. A man who planned his son's marriage like a corporate merger, and when his son refused, tried to utterly erase the woman his son actually loved. On March 2nd, Nathan placed a call to his father. Of course, it was recorded. We were recording every single phone call by that point. "Dad, I think you were right," Nathan said into the receiver. "We really need to focus on the business and what Lockwood Properties actually needs." The pause on Charles's end was undeniable, followed quickly by a wave of sudden warmth in his voice. "Nathan, I'm so glad you've finally come to your senses." "I want to make a statement at the Belmont signing," Nathan continued. "Lay out our vision for the partnership. Show them why this matters." "Wonderful," Charles said. "Preston is going to love that. March 6th, 10 a.m. I'll put you on the agenda. See you Friday, son." Just like that, Charles signed his own absolute downfall. He had no idea, but in just 4 days, everyone else would know too. Friday morning, March 6th. I put on a charcoal blazer over black dress pants, paired with a cream-colored silk blouse. At 15 weeks pregnant, if you weren't looking closely, that slight bump in my stomach could still be hidden pretty easily. That morning, I put my engagement ring back on. The sapphire and diamonds caught the morning light. It was Diana Lockwood's ring, the only legacy left in the Lockwood family truly worth keeping. Nathan was wearing his Tom Ford navy suit, pinned with his mother's cufflinks, matching sapphires to my ring. We had decided weeks ago, we were going to honor the woman who had truly loved him, and completely dismantle the man who had only ever tried to use him. We took a cab from Lincoln Park straight to the Gold Coast. Sitting in the back, we held hands tightly, without saying a word. Everything that needed to be said had already been mapped out, rehearsed, and organized neatly into our evidence folders. "Last chance," Nathan whispered as the cab pulled up in front of the Belmont Investment Group tower. "We can still turn around right now. There are other ways." I looked down at our clasped hands, at my ring, and finally at my stomach where our child was growing. "No," I said softly. "He needs to know what he almost destroyed. And everyone else needs to see who he really is." We walked into the lobby at 9:17 a.m. and took the elevator up to the 10th floor. The receptionist guided us toward the main boardroom. Charles was already there, sitting comfortably to the right of Preston Belmont's chair, looking completely relaxed and confident. The moment he saw me walk in, he froze. "What is she doing here?" Nathan set his leather briefcase down with a heavy thud on the mahogany table. "Annie is my fiancée. She deserves to be here to witness all of this." Preston Belmont looked confused. "Charles," I thought. "There must be some misunderstanding," Charles interrupted quickly, standing up from his seat. "Nathan, maybe we should step outside and talk in private." "Before we sign anything," Nathan said, his voice clear and ice-cold. "There are a few things everyone in this room needs to see." He unlatched the briefcase. This boardroom was designed to radiate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue, a massive mahogany table built to seat 12, and expensive leather chairs. It was the kind of room built for decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The key people were all in position. Preston Belmont at the head of the table. 4 board members, Jane Emerson, Harold Vance, Patricia Crawford, and Douglas Bennett. Charles sitting to Preston's right, Nathan and I standing. Spread across the center of the table were the partnership documents, still unsigned, waiting for the ink that would seal a $180 million deal. The clock read 9:58 a.m. when we arrived. At exactly 10 a.m., Nathan began. "This will only take 20 minutes of your time," Nathan said calmly. "Once we're finished, you can decide whether you still want to sign any agreement with my father." Nathan pulled out the first folder and opened it to the private investigator's report. On December 16, 2025, my father invited Annie to a private lunch. He offered her $200,000 in cash, along with a non-disclosure agreement, demanding she end our engagement and leave Chicago. Annie refused. She didn't take a single cent. He slid Kenneth Garrett's report across the table, the fabricated narrative alleging cash withdrawals and payoff acceptances. When she refused, my father hired a private investigator. That afternoon, as Annie walked out of a Chase Bank branch, the investigator took photos and manufactured false evidence to make it look like she took the money. Right beside the investigator's report, Nathan placed my actual bank receipt. Timestamp? 3:47 p.m. Deposit $2,900. Withdrawal $120. This is what Annie actually did that day. She deposited her paycheck. The investigator snapped photos of a routine errand and spun a completely fake story around it. Board member Patricia Crawford leaned forward, examining both documents closely. Her face was unreadable, but her attention was entirely locked in. Nathan then played the first audio recording. Charles's voice echoed clearly through the quiet room. $200,000, tax-free cash. You agree not to contact Nathan, never speak of this family, and make no future connection to the Lockwood name. Next, Nathan laid out the exact timeline. December 16th, the offer was made. December 16th, the photos were taken. December 17th, the fabricated report, along with a note saying she took the money, was delivered straight to Nathan's desk. When Annie refused to be bought off, my father tried to frame her as an extortionist. Nathan let those words hang in the heavy air for 5 solid seconds before continuing. Which raises a very serious question. If my father is willing to frame an innocent woman just to get his way, what else is he capable of doing? Nathan opened the second folder, financial records. As Vice President of Development, I have access to Lockwood Properties files. While reviewing project budgets, I came across several payments made to unfamiliar vendors, Apex Advisory Group and Meridian Consulting LLC. These are shell companies. No employees, no physical offices, and 0 real operations. He displayed the wire transfer logs. 8 transfers over 3 years, totaling $8.3 million routed into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. These companies don't exist. The money was funneled offshore to hide the paper trail. This is outright corporate fraud and tax evasion. Board member Douglas Bennett pulled out his phone and started taking clear photos of every single document. 2 of those accounts list Adrienne Lockwood, my father's wife, as a joint holder. Those 2 accounts alone hold $3.1 million. Harold Vance started taking rigorous notes. Jane Emerson's face turned completely pale. Nathan placed the family alliance agreement on the table. This document was drafted and negotiated between Charles Lockwood and Preston Belmont on October 15, 2025. Exactly 2 months before my father offered that bribe to Annie. Preston picked up the document and began reading. As the details registered, his expression completely changed. The agreement outlines a family union. It states that I must marry Victoria Belmont by December 2026. In exchange for this arranged marriage, Lockwood Properties would receive a 65-35 profit split instead of 60-40. My father literally wrote my marriage into a commercial contract as a bargaining chip. Preston kept reading, his jaw clenched tight. This wasn't some sudden reaction to me entering the picture, I chimed in, speaking up firmly. Your father tried to buy me out simply because I was an obstacle to a business deal he had arranged months earlier. Nathan then brought out the prenuptial agreement, dated November 15th. 26 pages. Orch. Anyone who signed this and married into the family would be trapped in a 10-year contract carrying massive financial penalties for any divorce or public scandal. He had this drafted a full month before he ever tried to bribe Annie. This was his plan all along. The room fell into absolute, deafening silence. Orch. The only sounds were Patricia Crawford flipping through pages, the faint shudder of Douglas Bennett's phone camera, and the scratch of Harold Vance's pen against paper. Finally, Nathan delivered the closing blow. The real reason my father was so desperate to force this marriage, and why he went as far as committing financial fraud to secure this deal, is right here. Orch. He laid out the financial statements for the Michigan Avenue project, proof of severe capital shortfalls on the River North development, unauthorized fund transfers between accounts, and finally, the September email thread between Charles and Adrian containing the sentence, "Once the Belmont funds are secured, we can restructure the Michigan Avenue debt." Orch. Lockwood Properties is severely over-leveraged, Nathan explained. My father has been quietly shifting money between projects without board approval, using shell companies to cover up losses and misappropriate funds. He was relying on the $180 million from the Belmont deal to cover up years of financial mismanagement and illicit transfers. This deal wasn't about growing the business. Orch. It was a desperate attempt to save himself, and he was entirely willing to sacrifice his own son's future to do it. Nathan closed the folder, turned, and looked straight at his father. This was your choice, Dad. This is what you built. Preston Belmont stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Get out. It wasn't a yell. It was a quiet, absolute end. Charles tried to speak. Orch. Preston, if you just give me a moment to explain. Get out of my office right now. The 4 board members sat frozen, watching the collapse without a hint of sympathy. The deal is dead, Preston said, his voice cold. Effective immediately. Furthermore, I will be handing over these offshore account records to federal tax authorities. Orch. I will also be consulting my legal team regarding your attempt to manipulate my daughter. He looked at Charles with sheer revulsion. You came into my office talking about family alliances and business integrity. Turns out you have neither. Charles swung around to face Nathan. You just destroyed everything. The entire company. You destroyed it, Nathan replied softly. Orch. The day you decided to treat your son as an asset instead of family. The moment you put a price tag on Annie and treated her like a problem you could buy off. You did this to yourself. Preston was already packing up his files and gesturing to the board that the meeting was over. Orch. I stepped forward, resting my hand over my stomach, where the slight curve was clearly visible if you knew where to look. Charles caught the movement. The remaining color drained completely from his face. I'm 15 weeks pregnant, Mr. Lockwood, I said, my voice steady and measured. When you handed me that cash and told me to disappear, I was already 6 weeks along. Orch. You tried to pay me to walk away from your own grandchild. When that failed, you manufactured evidence to ruin me. And you almost traded away your son's entire future. And this child's life, just to close a deal. I kept my hand on my belly, making sure every single person in that room saw it. This is who you really are, and now everyone knows. The silence in the room was absolute. Orch. Without another word, Preston Belmont walked out. Just like that, he was gone. In that single moment, the $180 million deal evaporated into thin air, along with everything Charles thought he had built. Orch. Charles looked at Nathan, looked at me, looked at the overwhelming evidence scattered across the table, at the board members who had witnessed it all, and finally at the partnership papers that would now never be signed. Then he turned and left. At 10:27 a.m., he walked out of the Belmont investment offices. porch. His footsteps echoed down the long hallway, the very hallway that had just watched a 30-year empire crumble to pieces in less than 23 minutes. The aftermath came faster than I ever imagined. By 5:30 p.m. that same Friday, Charles returned to Lockwood Properties to pack up his office. 27 years of personal belongings, photos, trophies, a framed ribbon from a 1998 charity golf tournament, architectural renderings of his first big project, were all packed into cardboard boxes by security guards. His assistant stood by, watching in cold, distant silence. On Saturday, March 7th, Adrian consulted a divorce attorney. Ever since the disaster at the Belmont meeting, she had been preparing for the worst, realizing that if she didn't act quickly, Charles's financial improprieties would drag her down too. On Sunday, March 8th, the headline on the Chicago Tribune business section read, "Lockwood Properties CEO steps down amid financial fraud allegations." The article was written carefully, using terms like alleged and sources confirm. But the core story was out in the open. Charles Lockwood had tried to manipulate a massive commercial transaction through an arranged marriage. Potential partners were presented with undeniable proof of financial wrongdoing, and the deal had completely collapsed. On Monday, March 9th at 2 p.m., Lockwood Properties called an emergency board meeting. All 7 directors were present. Motion: to demand the immediate resignation of Charles Lockwood as CEO, citing conclusive evidence of corporate fraud, misappropriation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. Vote: 7-0, unanimous. Motion: to appoint Nathan Lockwood as interim CEO effective immediately. Vote: 7-0, unanimous. The empire Charles spent 30 years building restructured itself around his absence in just 6 days. On Tuesday, March 10th, Crane's Chicago Business ran a feature story. Family betrayal or corporate scheme backfire? The tone was far more sympathetic to Nathan than to Charles, framing it as a story of a young executive exposing corruption to save the company, an innocent woman targeted simply because she refused a payoff, and a prenuptial agreement that read more like a corporate acquisition than a marriage contract. The architectural community rallied around me completely. Helen Sterling gave an interview, saying, "Annie Roberts is one of the most talented designers I know. More importantly, she is a person of unquestionable integrity. When someone tried to buy her silence, she walked away. When someone tried to frame her, she fought back with the truth. That tells you everything about who she is." That very week, Sterling and Hunt received 3 new client inquiries specifically requesting me as their lead designer. Also on Tuesday, Victoria Belmont sent me a private message on LinkedIn. I had no idea about the arrangement our fathers were trying to pull off behind the scenes. "I am horrified. I wish you and Nathan all the best. I never wanted to be any part of this." I believed her. She was just another pawn who didn't even realize a chessboard existed. In this world, some people get used by powerful fathers without ever knowing they were just bargaining chips in someone else's game. On Thursday, March 12th, Charles officially resigned from all remaining duties, retaining an 8% non-voting minority stake with 0 operational authority. Essentially, he was completely removed from the company he had run for 3 decades. That same day, Adrian officially filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences alongside fraudulent inducement, demanding a 50% split of marital assets. That triggered a month-long forensic accounting investigation that eventually tracked down the exact destination of those Cayman Islands funds. During those first few weeks, Charles tried to reach Nathan twice. On March 18th, a letter arrived on personal stationery. "We should talk. You're still my son." Nathan didn't even open it. On March 23rd, a text message came through. "No matter what I did or what mistakes were made, you are still my son." Nathan blocked the number. On March 27th, Nathan filed an official name change petition with the court. Nathan Lockwood Roberts. He chose to take the surname of the family that had truly taken him in. The family that welcomed him with chaotic kitchen dinners, overlapping laughter, and genuine warmth. It was his way of declaring a complete break from a man who valued control over affection. The formal name change process would take a few months, newspaper notices, court hearings, a final decree, but the filing itself was a clear declaration. I am choosing the family that chose me. On Saturday, March 14th, Helen Sterling called me into her office. Annie, we've decided to make it official. Starting April 1st, you're being promoted to Senior Associate Designer with a salary of $95,000. You earned this. Not because of what happened with Charles Lockwood, but because of who you proved yourself to be when you stood up to him. When I walked into that bribe lunch in December, I was making $78,000. Now I was making $95,000, on track for partnership, working at a firm I loved, with clients asking for me by name, because I had proven that I couldn't be bought. On Monday, March 16th, we had dinner with my family. Nathan and I drove out to my parents' house in Mount Prospect, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home where I grew up, where my dad built the back patio with his own hands, and where my mom still ran Sunday dinners like a well-oiled machine. That night, my dad, Jack Roberts, shook Nathan's hand differently. There was a weight to it, not the kind earned with fancy corporate titles, but earned through real action. You protected my daughter, Dad said. That's all that matters. Beth, my mom, hugged Nathan while crying, asked all about my growing belly, and then, like any emotional mother, cooked enough food to feed an entire neighborhood. My brother Owen joked that Nathan was finally joining a normal family, while my sister Claire showed off the baby clothes she had already bought, a little Chicago skyline onesie, and a pair of impossibly tiny socks. We crowded around the kitchen table, a table clearly too small for 6 people, but we squeezed in together just like always. Nathan looked around at the mismatched chairs, listened to the noisy crosstalk, and felt a kind of warmth that didn't cost a single dollar, yet meant everything in the world. Later, he whispered to me, "This is what he almost made me give up." I squeezed his hand tight. Charles would never understand that all the money in the world couldn't build a home like this. On Thursday, March 20th, at 11:20 a.m., in room 2304 of the Cook County Courthouse, I wore a cream-colored knee-length dress I bought for $180. It was a dress that let me proudly show off my 17-week belly instead of trying to hide it. Nathan wore his navy suit, his mother's cufflinks catching the light streaming through the high courthouse windows. Present as witnesses, my father, my mother, Grace Feldman, and Helen Sterling. They were there because the law required witnesses, but mostly because they truly wanted to share that moment with us. The judge was a woman in her 50s who had probably conducted 1,000 of these ceremonies, yet she smiled like every single one was special. By the authority vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Nathan kissed me as if no one else existed in that room. When we pulled apart, my dad was crying. My mom was crying. Claire was crying. Owen was trying hard not to. Grace was recording on her phone, and Helen was clapping softly. It was small, it was simple, and it was absolutely perfect. We had once planned a completely different wedding for June 14th at Salvatore's. 200 guests, lavish setups, the kind of event designed to impress everyone else. We canceled all of that. Or rather, I had canceled it back when we were playing out that heartbroken act for Charles. But this was so much better. 7 people in a courthouse, a 7-minute ceremony, followed by lunch at Lou Malnati's, the very deep dish pizza joint where Nathan and I had our first date back in July 2024. The booth where we first talked about architecture, family, and what happens after a building is finally finished. We reserved that exact same booth, ordered the same deep dish pizza, and toasted with water instead of champagne. Since I couldn't drink, Nathan didn't want to either. To Annie and Nathan, my dad said, raising his glass. To family that stays by your side. And to knowing that the only thing more valuable than money is the people you refuse to sell out. When we walked out of the courthouse, we were officially husband and wife. No corporate empires, no $180 million deals, no father's approval. Just us. Just this. And somehow it felt like having the entire world. We rented an apartment in Andersonville. A 1920s 4-story brick walk-up. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, about 1,100 square feet. Exposed brick in the living room, hardwood floors that gave off a cozy squeak when you walked on them, and a second bedroom with east-facing windows that caught the morning sun. Perfect for a nursery. We signed the lease on March 28th, with a move-in date set for April 15th. Standing in that empty room, I could already picture it. Soft green walls, a white crib, and the old rocking chair my mother kept from when I was a baby. Morning light resting gently over a sleeping child. It was a room in a neighborhood we chose ourselves. A building with no ties to Lockwood properties, no heavy legacy, and no shadow of anyone trying to control our lives from afar. Paint it yellow? Nathan asked from behind, wrapping his arms around me and placing his hands over my stomach. I was thinking a soft green, I replied. A peaceful green sounds perfect. We were starting over. Not because we had no choice, but because it was our choice. Every decision from here on out belonged to us. Every single step was being made by the people actually living the life. Charles made one last attempt to reach out on April 2nd, calling Nathan's office. The receptionist asked if he wanted to take it. Nathan said no. She asked if he wanted to leave a message. Tell him I'm in a meeting. Of course, he wasn't in a meeting. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing project proposals, learning how to lead a company at 30 years old, building something that looked far more like what his grandfather had started than the mess his father had created. But the message was crystal clear. There was nothing left to talk about. Nathan started attending therapy twice a week with Dr. Miriam Katz, a specialist in family trauma. He was processing the peculiar grief of losing a father who was still very much alive, mourning the father he had always wished for but never had, while accepting the reality of who his father actually was. I keep waiting for the guilt to hit me, Nathan admitted to me after a session in late March. For exposing him, for dismantling everything he worked for. But I don't feel guilty. I just feel relieved. Is that wrong? No, I told him gently. You're grieving the good father you deserved, not the toxic man he actually was. Those are 2 completely different losses. Some family members are chosen, and some you're just born into. Nathan was slowly learning how to tell the difference. On Sunday night, March 30th, our Lincoln Park apartment was half-packed, ready for the move to Andersonville. Cardboard boxes were labeled everywhere. Kitchen, books, Annie's work files. Life was being reordered, neatly stepping into a new phase. I stumbled across our original wedding planning folder from June 2025. The deposit receipts, the draft guest list, the floral sketches. Everything I had set aside when we put on our show for Charles. Nathan found it too, pulling out a much thinner, newer folder labeled Real Wedding, March 2026. Inside was our courthouse marriage certificate, the receipt from Lou Malnati's, and the photo Grace snapped right after the judge pronounced us husband and wife. Which one is better? Nathan asked, holding up both folders. I smiled, laying my hand over my belly. At 20 weeks, the baby's movements were undeniable now, firm little kicks proving that our daughter was growing healthy and strong, and she was completely ours. The one where we faced everything and still chose each other, I said, looking into his eyes. Even when it cost us everything. He pulled me close, carefully avoiding my bump, resting his palm against my stomach as if he could protect our child with that touch alone. We're building our own foundation now, he said softly. Our home, our way, our roots. Here's the thing about foundations. Some are inherited, and some are built with your own 2 hands. Inherited foundations often come with heavy history, pressure, and unrealistic expectations. Sometimes they carry deep cracks that weren't your fault, but end up being your burden to fix. Foundations you build yourself start from the ground up. Piece by piece, you pick every beam, every support, every brick that holds the structure together. It's harder, it takes longer, and it requires you to know exactly what you're building and why. But those foundations belong to you, and they actually hold up. I looked around our half-packed apartment, thinking about our new life waiting in Andersonville. A neighborhood Charles Lockwood would never step foot in, a building that would never bear a Lockwood development sign, and a future free from anyone trying to put a price tag on our lives. Some foundations are inherited, I whispered. Some are built from scratch. Nathan kissed my forehead. And we are building ours. In 4 months, we'll welcome a daughter into the world. We're going to name her Diane Beth, after Nathan's mother and my mother, to honor the strong women who showed up for us and the ones who left us too soon. We'll raise her in that sunlit Andersonville apartment, teaching her that you can't buy integrity and you can't fake real love. That in this life, there are things far more valuable than anything that fits inside a corporate briefcase. She will never meet her grandfather, Charles. That is, our choice, our boundary, and our way of protecting what we've built from the man who tried to tear it apart. This story will linger on social media for a while. Screenshots of the Chicago Tribune article, Reddit threads dissecting corporate downfalls, and short videos talking about the designer who turned down $200,000. People will have their opinions. Some will say I should have taken the cash. Some will say Nathan betrayed his father. Others will say we were naive to think love could survive such a mess. Let them think whatever they want. We know the truth. And the truth is this. On December 16, 2025, a man tried to pay me $200,000 to walk away from his son's life. I said no. He tried to frame me as an extortionist using fake evidence. My fiancé saw through the lie in 6 seconds flat. We stood shoulder to shoulder and documented every single wrong he committed. The fraud, the misrepresentation, the manipulation, and the schemes. We laid it all out in front of the people who mattered most. The $180 million deal fell apart. A corrupt executive lost his position. A young couple stood in a courtroom with 7 witnesses and promised their lives to each other, sharing more genuine love than you'll find in most lavish ballrooms. A few months later, they welcomed a daughter, who will grow up knowing that some things in this world simply aren't for sale, and that the people who try to put a price tag on everything eventually end up with nothing at all. This is our story. This is our foundation. And what we are building is going to stand forever.